The latest Parliamentary Budget Officer report reveals something you already knew, that you're spending hundreds of dollars more on the federal carbon tax than you're getting back in rebates. Comes as no surprise to Canadians who are feeling the pinch at grocery stores, at the pumps, and when they're heating their homes. And now, even Liberal MPs are threatening a caucus revolt because of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's failing leadership, including his inability to scrap failing policies like the carbon tax. We're now all wondering whether the carbon tax could not only cause the Liberals to lose the election, but also cause Justin Trudeau to lose his leadership. Joining me today to discuss is Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I am Rachel Parker, and you're watching The Rachel Parker Show. And now I'm joined by Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, to break down the latest PBO report on the carbon tax. Are you actually getting out ahead because of it? The federal government certainly wants you to think so. Franco, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So obviously, we're really grateful for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and for all the work that you guys do to break down these numbers for Canadians and actually get to the heart of what's going on. We know there's been a lot of disinformation from the Trudeau Liberals about the carbon tax, and they seem desperate to convince Canadians that it's benefiting us. Why don't you start by breaking down these latest numbers from the PBO? What does it actually say about how Canadians are being impacted by the carbon tax?
Well, it's costing us big time. And it's costing us more, hundreds of dollars more than what we're getting back in rebates, right? So the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which is the government's own independent, nonpartisan budget watchdog, is proving, once again, with like its third report, it's proving what Canadians outside of the political bubble in Ottawa already know, that the carbon tax is making our lives more expensive. So here are the numbers, folks. According to the PBO, the carbon tax will cost the average family up to $399 more this year than what they're getting back in rebates. But of course, Trudeau plans to make your life more expensive by cranking up the carbon tax every single year. So by 2030, the carbon tax will cost the average family up to $903 more than what they're getting back in rebates. But you know what, folks? Even those huge costs downplay the total cost over those time, right? So between now and the end of 2030, the carbon tax will cost the average family up to $4,300 more than what they're getting back in rebates. So PBO confirming what most Canadians already know is that the carbon tax makes our life more expensive and is a huge drag on the Canadian economy.
With this Liberal government, a trend that we've seen more so than with any other government that I've personally covered is really just hard-headedness. They seem so unwilling to change directions, even when it's been proven time and time again that the policies they're putting forward aren't working for Canadians. We've even seen BC Premier David Eby, obviously in the midst of an election, change his tune on carbon tax, carbon pricing, like they usually like to use more euphemisms to refer to it because it's so unpopular. Why do you think that the Trudeau government hasn't changed directions on the carbon tax? Is it just something that they believe they're so tied to ideologically that they're unwilling to change their tune on it?
That's a really good question. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I really don't know, right? Because you can see that they're sticking to the carbon tax as of yet to their own detriment, right? Everyone can read the same polls that show the support for the Liberals are plummeting. Well, let's ask ourselves why support for the Liberals in Ottawa are plummeting. It's because they are making life too expensive. And the key example is the carbon tax. And the reason the carbon tax is so damaging, so hurtful for so many Canadians is because it impacts almost every aspect of Canadian life. Well, Canada is a very big country. Guess what? The carbon tax makes it more expensive for you to get around, for you to fuel up your car, to get to work, or to take the kids to hockey practice. Well, Canada's a very cold place. And guess what? The carbon tax makes it more expensive for you to stay warm, right? The carbon tax on natural gas alone this year will cost the average family like $360. And that's just the carbon tax on natural gas. Well, guess what? We all need to eat. And the carbon tax stings you there too, right? The carbon tax makes it more expensive for farmers to grow food. The carbon tax makes it more expensive for truckers to deliver the food. And of course, the carbon tax makes it more expensive for you to buy food. And let's not forget our economy, which is so reliant on Canada's abundant natural resources. Well, the carbon tax will cost our Canadian economy like $12 billion this year alone.
You know, I just want to sort of even take a stab at that. It was funny. I was reading the news today, and Stephen Guilbeault, our federal environment minister, his press secretary even admitted in media, she said, you know, the carbon tax gets a lot of negative attention. I suspect one of the reasons the Liberals aren't willing to change their tune on this is because they've been pushing it so hard for so long that it would basically just admit the level of government incompetence and that they are not able to govern Canadians properly. I don't know if it's something that they could really change their tune on, because I suspect it would lead to the fall of the government, because it's been something they've been pushing so hard for so long. And it's really, if you think about the Liberal government, this has been one of their pinnacle policies from day one. This is something that they've been pushing so hard since Trudeau was elected. So I don't know if they can change their tune on it. I know Canadians are hoping that we'll be heading to the polls federally soon. Speaking of Guilbeault, we have him once again trying to justify this tax. Let's roll this clip of him in the House of Commons. I want to get your reaction to it, Franco.
Considering only the fiscal impact of the federal fuel charge, PBO estimates that average household in each of the backstop provinces in 2030-2031 will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada carbon rebate than the total amount they pay in federal fuel charge. That's what the PBO report says. So now's the time to clear the air on Pierre Poilievre's big lie to Canadian. He's been misleading Canadian. The PBO is very clear. More Canadians get money back from the Canada carbon rebate than what they pay. What is also clear is that our plan is working. We've never seen in our history before emissions go down at a time of full economic growth in this country. That has never happened before.
Okay, I'm going to let you respond to the actual content of what he said there, but just off the top, just kind of reading his body language, nothing says, I know the facts, like literally reading off of a piece of paper. Like this is, you're the federal environment minister, you literally have one job, you can't even memorize basic facts to read them to the media. You understand this so little that you actually have to read the report. Like I could do that. Like anyone could do that. Go ahead.
Rachel, he kind of let the cat out of the bag when he said, quote, only the fiscal impacts, right? Ignore the big costs in the room. Ignore the elephant in the room. You know what, Guilbeault, minister, not so fast, because you're not considering the full cost of the carbon tax, right? Rachel, what he said is like me saying, yeah, I'm sticking to my diet if you don't count the Big Mac and fries and beer that I had Saturday night. Right? Well, you can't just look at one part of the cost. You got to look at all of the costs. And as I mentioned, right, the carbon tax, it doesn't just cost you when you go to the gas pumps. It doesn't just cost you when you heat your home, right? It costs you in almost every aspect of life where the carbon tax costs are passed throughout the entire economy. Just as an example, right? When a farmer is growing food, well, the carbon tax will cost farmers like $1 billion by 2030. Then you got to have a trucker to deliver the food. Well, the carbon tax costs truckers about $2 billion this year alone. So you can see how the carbon tax has this trickle effect throughout the entire Canadian economy, right? So Guilbeault isn't even covering the full costs, right? But the Parliamentary Budget Officer looked at all of the costs, and when you look at all of the costs, the carbon tax will cost average families hundreds of dollars more than they get back in rebates. Oh, by the way, the PBO's numbers only look at the consumer carbon tax, right? You're also paying an industrial carbon tax and another carbon tax that Trudeau buried in fuel regulation. So at the end of the day, the carbon tax is costing Canadians big time. And you know what? I think the Liberals even know that.
Franco, just my last question for you here. I talk to Chris Sims, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, all the time, and she tells me a lot of, really heart-wrenching stories about how much you guys are hearing from Canadians about how they're really struggling. With regards to this latest report, I know there's also just a level of fatigue with the Liberal government. It seems like it's bad news all the time with them. But you guys often get more of a personal element when you're hearing from people who are, really struggling to make ends meet, losing their homes, can't pay for gas, can't pay for groceries. Have you heard from Canadians about this latest report?
Well, the big thing that we're getting from Canadians from this latest report, we hear from Canadians all the time struggling to make ends meet. But from this latest report, it's kind of, well, no duh. Of course, the carbon tax is making life more expensive. Of course, the carbon tax costs people more than what they get back in rebates, right? Like, think about it. The government also charges its sales tax on top of the carbon tax, costing Canadians hundreds of millions of dollars. And that tax on tax money isn't rebated back, right? The government is also spending like $200 million hiring the bureaucrats to administer the carbon tax. So there's no way that a government can impose a carbon tax, skim hundreds of millions of dollars off the top, then charge its sales tax on top of the carbon tax, and somehow make everyone better off. And Rachel, I mentioned that even the Liberals know the carbon tax makes life more expensive. Case in point, last year, the Liberal government, Trudeau, surrounded by his Atlantic Canadian caucus, announced that he would take the carbon tax off of furnace oil for a couple of years to provide relief. Well, if the carbon tax isn't making life more expensive, why would Trudeau take the carbon tax off of furnace oil? That was an admission that the carbon tax makes life more expensive, and it was also an admission that the carbon tax is about politics, not the planet.
Franco, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Okay, everyone, that was Franco Terrazzano, the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I really enjoy having the Taxpayers Federation people come on because they really know their stuff. Actually, as Franco was speaking, I was getting a little bit nervous as I was sharing with some of you guys last week. We recently moved, so you guys have to deal with my little bit of a plain setup right now. It's a bit of a work in progress to get things fully unpacked at our new house. Certainly quite a bit of work, especially when you're also working on the side and have a little one running around. But we're slightly more rural than I've ever lived before. I think it's like 30 minutes to get to a Costco now, 30 minutes to get to a mall. For some of you who live in maybe rural Ontario or rural Alberta, you're thinking, oh, that's nothing. I have to drive, an hour and a half to get to Costco. Well, it's new for me. I've only ever really lived in the city before. Even when I lived in Ontario, I wouldn't say I lived in the city, but it was about 10 minutes to get to the nearest city. So certainly the most rural I've ever lived. It's going to be a bit of an adjustment. I suspect we'll probably save a lot of money because I won't be going out as often to do some browsing. But I am, not looking forward to getting my heating bill, to seeing our fuel costs tick up. I was just saying to some of you guys a little while ago, I really actually do like the Cybertruck. Maybe, and honestly, the comments on this, I always read your comments, and the comments on this are so split. Half of you are like, it doesn't work in Alberta, you don't want to deal with it. And then the other half of you are like, I drive a Tesla, I charge it at night, like it's totally fine. So, I'll have to kind of wait. I'm not getting a new vehicle right away, but I'm going to kind of wait, maybe do a little bit more research. Maybe I'll have someone on the show to talk about specifically electric vehicles in somewhere cold, like rural Alberta, and see what they say. Let me know if you guys would be interested on something about that. But as Franco was talking, I was just thinking, oh, this carbon tax is really going to be hurting me even more so now that I just live a little bit further north, a little farther away from things. So yeah, not looking forward to getting those heating costs. All right, now we didn't really touch on this in my interview with Franco, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this Liberal caucus revolt. We know that there's been whisperings that a lot of Liberal MPs are not happy with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Well, the reason for that being is they're seeing their polling numbers. They're seeing their disastrous polling numbers, and they're looking at this, and most of them are thinking, I'm going to be out of a job within a few short months, probably under a year. And that's very true. That's just the nature of politics. You lose your seat, you have to find a new job. Can be a bit of a difficult lifestyle for some people. That being said, I don't really necessarily think being a career politician is the best thing. A lot of times, people go in, make the changes they want to see, go out and do something out. That's probably the better way to do things. But that's typically not what we see in our system. We see people go, they become an MP typically for, decades. A lot of our politicians in Ottawa, they've been there for absolutely for decades. And certainly they bring a level of experience to the position, but I also think you become hardened and a little bit unaware of what life is actually like for Canadians elsewhere in the world. You kind of get stuck in your bubble. So anyways, that was a little bit of a digression. Let's continue with the Liberal caucus revolt. Althea Raj of the Toronto Star reported that a bunch of MPs met when Justin Trudeau was traveling, and they were discussing their unhappiness with the way things are going. Her report claimed that up to 30 to 40 MPs are going to be willing to sign a petition that would ask Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down. Now, that is a far cry from the 76 MPs that would be half of the Liberal caucus that would put a much stronger push on Trudeau to resign. I spoke a little bit about Justin Trudeau's hard-headedness. I think he knows that his caucus is unhappy with him. I think he knows that there's growing resentment, partly because a lot of these people are going to be losing their seats and because the Liberal Party is going to be decimated in the next election. Let's be very clear about this. The Liberal Party will be decimated in the next election unless they can pull a quick 1-2, sort of like we're seeing with the Democrats in the States right now, where they switch out their leader and act like none of the bad things that ever happened were tied to this new leader. They had no part in the Liberal Party's past decisions. But that's going to be very difficult for them to do. I don't even think it's really working very effectively in the States right now, as you would know if you watch Rachel in the Republic, where I cover all things U.S. election related. So I think Justin Trudeau understands that there's a level of resentment growing within his caucus. I kind of doubt that he cares. He's looking for a nice, cushy UN job to fall on after he leaves his job as Prime Minister. I don't think he actually cares what happens to his Liberal MPs. I doubt that he likes them very much anyways. And after that report from Althea Raj came out, there was a follow-up report from David Aiken of Global News, and he said that a lot of the complaints actually have to do with the carbon tax. A lot of the Liberal MPs think that it would help if Justin Trudeau finally scrapped the carbon tax. They think that would help their polling numbers. They think that would help them save their seats. And one of them even said, it's going to be scrapped anyways once Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister, so might as well scrap it now. As I said, I don't think that will happen. I think that for the Liberal government to scrap the carbon tax, it would admit that their entire government and the premise of all their policies was essentially built on a lie that they forced down our throat for so many years and forced us to pay so much more for goods and services. I don't really know how they could even walk something like that back at this point, because it would just reveal such an abject failure of their government. It would reveal so much incompetence and acknowledgement of the pain and the suffering that they've caused Canadians, which they've already done to an extent with things like removing the tax on fuel heating for your homes in Atlantic Canada, as Franco was speaking about earlier. So, I mean, and even for the Liberal MPs, like, it's hard to sort of be like, oh, you know, I'm glad they're organizing now. Like, it's a little bit too little, too late. They don't have much courage. Like, this is the problem with politicians in Canada, is really like a lack of courage. I think we saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where were the leaders who were willing to speak up against the policies that we were seeing during COVID, when we essentially saw tyranny being rolled in. We saw like a soft launching of tyranny in Canada. And there was no political leaders who were willing to stand against it. So we definitely have a huge issue with courage, politicians writ large, and the Liberal caucus is no exception to this. All right, everyone, now let's roll into the clip of the week. As you know, I don't watch these in advance. My producer, Sean, picks them for me. Let's see what he has for us today.
Today is a good day, because if you live in one of these provinces, check your bank account. You just got the Canada Carbon Rebate. It looks like this, or like this. It's a payment from us that goes out 4 times a year. We put a price on pollution, and the revenue goes straight back into your pockets. So check your bank account or your mailbox in the coming days.
So this does not look to me like a man who is in a few weeks' time about to say, you know what, never mind, we're actually not going to do the whole carbon tax thing. Those rebates, they didn't actually benefit you as much as we said they did. You were actually still paying more for goods and services than you were getting back in rebates. That to me does not look like a politician who is anywhere near the place of planning to roll back a policy. He's obviously going to continue with this government narrative that Canadians are better off with the carbon tax. I can pretty much guarantee you, now, as I said, I haven't seen this clip. I haven't seen the comments underneath it. I would be willing to bet like $500 that a good number of the comments, maybe even half the comments underneath that post, were people being like, oh, check our bank accounts. Did you freeze it again? It's so funny. Anytime Trudeau talks about bank accounts, everyone's immediately like, oh no, I'm like a little nervous because he probably froze my bank account again. So maybe he should find a new way to approach these types of topics without using the check your bank accounts language, because I think Canadians, we have a lot of shared trauma from the Trudeau government and the way that they've treated our bank accounts in the past. All right, everyone, I missed doing this last week, but I am going to continue doing it moving forward because it's one of my favorite parts of the show is responding to your comments. I always tell you guys that I do read them all the time. Sometimes if they're really mean, I'll like take a breather and get back to them later, but you guys are usually very good. And if there's criticism, it's fairly constructive. Sometimes people just complain about random things like my voice. Can't change that. If you don't like it, this might not be the show for you. Just being totally honest about the like confines of what I'm able to change. But let's take a look at your comments from last week's episode, which I covered the Jasper wildfires and the admission that many firefighters were not allowed in by Parks Canada to help fight the fire. Here today, Gone to Maui said, are Parks Canada also in charge of fighting church fires? Doesn't seem like anyone is in charge of fighting these church fires. They continually happen. It's so sad. My colleague, Cosmin Georgia, has been probably the foremost reporter covering this. He has a map of all the church fires across Canada. Definitely go check that out on True North if you can. At this point, I would say that if I was the caretaker of one of these old and beautiful historic churches, you definitely want to be investing the money into a good security system. So that you know when someone's entering the property, because this is not going to stop happening. There's so much hatred towards Christianity in Canada today, especially when we see things like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Gerald Butts essentially being like, it's understandable that this would happen. It's too bad, but it's understandable. So these types of things are not going to stop happening. And, the government doesn't take crime seriously anymore. They're not going to take this seriously. So, for people who have these types of churches, I think kind of just understand that your government really doesn't care. See if you can go to your congregation, if you still have an active congregation, and fundraise some money for a proper security system, because I guarantee that you will get use out of it. User at Jackie Anderson said, the government has too many regulations that keep people from being able to do what needs to be done. Federal government needs to back off, and so does the provincial government. Certain regulations are needed, of course, but they have overregulated. No wonder things never get done in a timely manner. And that's just so true. I mean, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Typically, when government gets involved, there's so much more bureaucracy, and it just seems like there's a lot of people pushing paper without actually taking action. I think that is, at least part of what we saw go wrong in Jasper when contract firefighters showed up to help fight the fires and were told by Parks Canada that they were not allowed to be there and that they wouldn't have access to water from the Athabasca Lake, for example. So, in this case, the federal government, too many regulations, but also sometimes it just seems straight up malicious, like the Trudeau government freezing our bank accounts, straight up malicious. Sometimes it just has to do with regulation. Other times it has to do with a government that actively hates a certain part of the population who have certain political leanings and just does not want them to benefit or to excel. And also sometimes just hating the people that grew up in Canada and call Canada home. All right, everyone, that's all we have time for today on The Rachel Parker Show. I will be back tomorrow with more content on Rachel and the Republic covering the American election. If you support our work, you can do that over at donate.tnc.news. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our content from me or from my other colleagues at True North who are doing amazing work as well. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. God bless.